Marcy Correctional Facility Sergeant Glenn Trombley approached this group of corrections officers, we must warn you that the footage we'll be watching is incredibly disturbing and is not for the faint of heart. However, it's of the utmost importance for the public to see the sheer brutality and culture of dehumanization our law enforcement and criminal justice systems inflict on the people in their custody. The detained inmate you saw being dragged away is Robert Brooks, and tragically, the pain he's suffering here pales in comparison to how he was treated upon entering the infirmary inside of Marcy Correctional Facility. Corrections officer Michael Along captured the moment Brooks was literally carried into the prison infirmary while his hands were still restrained behind his back, following his fellow officers to a room down the hall where you can briefly see at least one of the officers digging his knee into the back of Brooks's leg with his full body weight on top of him as more officers filter into the hallway and his room. We pick back up with Sergeant Trombley's body cam, which shows Brooks in his green jumpsuit with his hands restrained, surrounded by at least 6 officers. We unfortunately may never know what was being said here because the footage was recorded while the body cams were not activated but in standby mode. And New York AG Letitia James's office redacted certain info per department policy. Now, just over a minute later, all hell breaks loose in the examination room as one officer appears to hit Brooks with his own shoe before striking Brooks with multiple punches, all the while the other officers watch. From Corrections Officer Matthew Gallagher's perspective, we see one officer shove a white substance, presumably a cloth or tissue, into Brooks's mouth, while the second officer locks his hands around Brooks's neck just before the third officer begins beating him with his shoe and punching his legs. The officer on Brooks's left also appeared to never have let go of his neck, choking him the entire time and throwing him around by his neck, while another officer continued hitting him with his shoe, forcing him into an upright sitting position as the beating continued. 3 officers then force him to lie back down on the exam table. Now back to Sergeant Trombley's body cam. We see an officer stomp on and shove his boot into Brooks' stomach as 2 officers restrain his head and neck, while a 4th officer takes a free shot at Brooks' stomach and groin. Yet another officer joins the fray and restrains Brooks' legs as he lays defenseless on the table. The irony of such an act of brutality occurring inside a medical examination room is a perfect encapsulation of our criminal justice system. Even in one of the only possible places where a prisoner can still feel like a human with dignity while in custody, it can be snatched away at a moment's notice because of the culture the system has cultivated and perpetuated. Brooks is then punched multiple times again by the officer, restraining his left leg as at least 2 officers continue putting both of their body weights down on Brooks's upper body. He is then shackled while remaining on the table for another minute or so as the officers look on. He is then shoved up into a sitting position yet again, with his face bloodied and showing clear signs of the injuries he sustained thus far just through his body language alone. And just seconds later, the officer holding the back of Brooks's neck lands a savage punch to his completely exposed ribcage as he struggles to minimize the damage as much as possible from the attack. Around 30 seconds after suffering the blow to his chest, Brooks is then picked up by the collar of his shirt off of the table and shoved into the corner of the exam room. There are at least 7 officers who could have stepped up and stopped the beating way before it even got to this point. But when you're trained to view prisoners as second-class citizens and not deserving of the same basic rights and dignity as anyone else, as well as being incentivized to continue treating them this way, then you can't be surprised that these are the horror stories we expect to see and hear. And hey, just a quick break in the action. You should go subscribe to my new show, The Rick Strom Show. I'm going to be interviewing people from sports, music, journalists, authors, sports doctors. It's going to be fantastic. Please go subscribe. Thank you.
There is growing outrage today over the death of an inmate in a New York State prison who was brutally beaten by more than a dozen correction officers. Detainee advocates are concerned it's part of a larger culture of violence within the state's correctional system.
3 of the guards involved in the assault against Brooks were previously accused of beating inmates in a similar manner. As of today, none of the 14 employees implicated have been charged with wrongdoing. But New York State Attorney General Letitia James promised a full investigation.
Because I have a responsibility and duty to provide the Brooks family, their loved ones, and all New Yorkers with transparency and accountability.
Authorities have not released an official cause of death for Brooks, but according to court documents, the medical examiner's preliminary findings show, quote, concern for asphyxia due to compression of the neck. Robert Brooks was 43 years old.
Robert Brooks tragically passed away the morning after the beating, succumbing to the injuries he suffered at a local hospital, joining the thousands of others who fell victim to the prison industrial complex and our inhumane criminal justice system.
That was some of the most gruesome, just brutal, unnecessary, wickedness, the desire. You could just tell the desire to brutalize somebody just because you could. You know what I mean? To beat a shackled man. They was kicking him. And when I see it, it's so crazy to see something like that and realize and have to, what I feel compelled to point out to people is that's happening all the time.
Lawyer and activist Olayemi Olurin could not have said it better. The inhumanity and brutality Robert Brooks suffered at the hands of the officers and the lack of coverage until weeks after the beating are all features of the criminal justice system, not symptoms.
And people call for these charges, or people are like, oh, look at the brutality of this corrections facility. It's not an anomaly. This is not a one-off. You know what I mean? You just happening to see this. It's not specific to that corrections facility. This is what's happening all around the country. It doesn't get any attention because people in society have this attitude that that's what you deserve, or you behind prison, so anything could happen to you. And that's the scariest part. There's a reason why they felt so brazen that they could do that with body cam footage on them.
We could not agree more. Olay is a must-follow on all of our social media accounts, and we will link them down below. Though New York Governor Kathy Hochul ordered everyone involved in Brooks' death to be fired, so far 13 people have been suspended without pay, and one has resigned. Hochul also named a new superintendent of the facility in response to the beating. As of this recording, no charges have been filed against those who actively participated in the beating, as well as the cowards who looked on and refused to put a stop to it. We sincerely hope that Brooks' family will receive the justice they deserve, and regardless of the sentence Brooks was serving, no person deserves to have their humanity stripped away like he did. If you can and are willing, please become a paid member here at TYTSports. And or go to tyt.com/join. In addition, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate it. Have a great day.